Montana Territory, spring 1878. The howling wind carried more than just dust across the Montana plains that late April morning. It carried the weight of broken dreams and foreclosed futures. Zachary Tucker guided his buckskin mare along the rutted trail toward the settlement of Copper Creek, his 25 years sitting heavy on shoulders that had learned early how cruel the frontier could be. Beneath the wide brim of his weather-stained Stetson, his blue eyes scanned the horizon with practiced wariness, and his clean-shaven jaw remained set in the hard line of a man who had seen too much death to believe in anything as foolish as love. The frontier was no place for softness. Zachary had learned that truth when he was 14, watching his mother die of mountain fever while his father stood helpless beside her bed. He learned it again at 17 when his older brother took a Sioux arrow during a raid, bleeding out in Zachary's arms before the sun set. And he learned it a final, bitter time 3 years ago when Sarah Morrison promised to wait for him while he worked a cattle drive to Texas, only to marry the banker's son before Zachary even crossed back into Montana Territory. Love was a luxury. Survival was the only currency that mattered out here where the land itself seemed determined to grind hope into dust. Zachary wanted nothing more than to save enough money working as a hired hand to buy his own small spread someday, to live alone where disappointment could never find him again. A man needed land, cattle, and solitude, nothing more. He crested the ridge overlooking the Anderson property just as the sun broke through the gray clouds, and what he saw made him rein in his mare sharply. The ranch house stood defiant against the elements, but barely, roof shingles missing, fence posts leaning at drunken angles, and in the muddy yard, a young woman struggled with a bucking horse that was clearly getting the better of her. Zachary's first instinct was to ride on, not his business, not his problem. The Anderson ranch had been failing for 2 years since old Thomas Anderson took sick, and hiring on there would be throwing good work after bad. But then the horse reared high and the woman lost her grip on the lead rope, tumbling backward into the mud with a cry that carried clearly across the distance. His hands moved before his mind could countermand them, spurring his mare down the slope. By the time he reached the yard, the woman had picked herself up, her dark brown hair escaping from its practical bun to hang in mud-streaked tangles around a face that was young, maybe 21 or 22, and striking in its determined beauty despite the circumstances. Her calico dress, faded but clean before her fall, was now covered in muck. "That horse needs a firmer hand," Zachary called out, swinging down from his saddle. The young woman spun toward him, and he found himself looking into eyes the color of new spring grass, bright, fierce, and entirely unafraid. "That horse needs training. I do not have time to give it," she shot back, wiping mud from her cheek and only succeeding in smearing it further. "And I do not recall asking for your opinion, mister." "Zachary Tucker," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I heard in town that Thomas Anderson was looking to hire on a hand." Her expression shifted from defiance to something more guarded. "My father died 3 weeks ago," she said flatly. "I am Willa Anderson. If you are looking for work, I am afraid I cannot pay much. Truth be told, I can barely pay anything at all." The admission seemed to cost her something. Pride, maybe, or the last shreds of pretense that the Anderson ranch was anything but drowning. Zachary should have offered his condolences, tipped his hat, and ridden on. Instead, he found himself asking, "What can you pay?" "Room and board," Willa said, lifting her chin in a gesture that dared him to laugh at the meager offer. "2 meals a day, a bed in the bunkhouse, and a share of the profits when we sell the cattle in the fall, assuming there are any profits." "Assuming we make it to fall." It was the worst job offer Zachary had heard in 10 years of cowboy work. Any sensible man would have refused. "Show me what needs doing," he heard himself say instead. The surprise that flickered across Willa's face was quickly masked, but not before Zachary caught a glimpse of something else beneath her tough exterior, relief, desperate and raw. "Everything needs doing," she said. "The north fence is down, we have calves that need branding, the well pump is acting up, the roof leaks in 4 places, and I have 3 hands who quit last month when I could not pay their wages." "Just you here alone?" Zachary asked, and felt an unwelcome stirring of concern. "My younger brother, Nathaniel, is 13. He helps where he can, but he is better with books than livestock." Willa turned toward the house, her back straight despite the mud and exhaustion. "The bunkhouse is behind the barn." "It is not much, but it is dry, mostly. Supper is at 6. I will understand if you change your mind and ride out." She walked away before Zachary could respond, and he stood there in the yard wondering what momentary madness had possessed him to take on a dying ranch for no wages and the slim hope of autumn profits. The smart thing would be to mount up and head for one of the bigger spreads where real money could be earned. Instead, he led his mare toward the barn. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of back-breaking labor that left Zachary too exhausted to question his decision. He repaired the north fence, patched the roof, coaxed the temperamental well pump back into service, and spent long days in the saddle moving cattle to better grazing. Willa worked alongside him with a determination that bordered on ferocious, never complaining, never asking for help she could do herself. She was unlike any woman Zachary had known on the frontier. She could rope a calf, mend leather tack, and shoot a rifle well enough to bring down a coyote threatening the chicken coop. She wore men's work gloves that were too large for her hands, and her dresses were all practical calico or homespun with the hems deliberately shortened for riding. But in the evenings, when she brought supper out to the bunkhouse, she insisted on maintaining that propriety, never inviting him into the main house after dark. Her hair would be neatly pinned back and her face scrubbed clean, and Zachary would find himself noticing things he had no business noticing. The way lamplight caught in her dark brown hair, bringing out hidden threads of auburn, the determination in those green eyes that never wavered even when discussing problems that would have broken most men. The rare smile that transformed her entire face when her younger brother Nathaniel said something amusing. Zachary crushed those observations the moment they arose. He was here to work to earn a stake for his own future, nothing more. Certainly not to entertain foolish notions about the woman whose ranch was clearly circling the drain despite their best efforts. On a warm evening in mid-May, as Zachary was finishing the day's work in the barn, Willa appeared in the doorway with a troubled expression that immediately put him on alert. "There is something I need to tell you," she said without preamble. "It is only fair you know what you have gotten yourself into." Zachary set down the bridle he had been oiling and waited. Willa took a breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "My father borrowed money from Raymond Sutherland 2 years ago when the herd caught that fever. Mr. Sutherland owns the Double S Ranch east of here, biggest spread in 3 counties. The loan comes due in October. If I cannot pay the $500 plus interest, he takes the ranch." $500, it might as well have been 5,000. Zachary had never seen that much money in one place in his entire life. "What is the interest?" 20%, so $600 total. Willa's voice remained steady, but her knuckles had gone white. "We have maybe 60 head of cattle ready for market. If we can get them to the railhead at Miles City, and if the prices hold, we might clear enough to pay the debt." Too many ifs. Too many ways for disaster to strike between now and fall. Why is Sutherland holding paper on this place? Man like that does not need the interest on a small loan. Something flickered in Willa's expression, anger, maybe, or bitter understanding. "Raymond Sutherland has been trying to buy this land since my father refused to sell 5 years ago. There is a natural spring on the north section that never runs dry, even in drought years. Control that water and you control every small rancher in the valley. My father knew that. He would rather have died than sell." "He did die," Zachary pointed out quietly. "And now the ranch is mine," Willa said, lifting her chin in that gesture he was coming to recognize as pure stubborn pride. "Mine and Nathaniel's, and I will not lose it to a man like Sutherland who sees people as pieces on a chessboard to be moved or removed as suits his purposes. What does Sutherland get out of waiting until October? If he wanted the land, seems like he could have foreclosed already." Willa's gaze slid away from his, and 2 spots of color appeared high on her cheekbones. "Mr. Sutherland made me an offer. He said he would forgive the debt entirely if I agreed to marry him." The words hit Zachary like a physical blow which made no sense whatsoever. Willa Anderson's marital prospects were none of his concern. "I see," he managed. "I refused, of course." Willa's voice was cold as winter ice. "Raymond Sutherland is 43 years old. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances, fell down the stairs, they said, but she had bruises that did not match the fall. His second wife ran off to California and filed for divorce through the courts there. I would rather lose the ranch than put myself in that man's power. So he gave you until October." Time enough for you to fail and come crawling back to accept his offer. That about sums it up. Willa finally met his eyes again. I am telling you this because you have a right to know there might not be any profits come fall. If we lose the ranch, you will have worked for months for nothing but meals and a roof. I will not blame you if you want to ride out tonight. It was the second time she had given him that option, and Zachary found himself getting irritated by it. I stay until the job is done or you tell me to leave, he said gruffly. Those were the terms I agreed to. Relief flooded Willa's face, and for just a moment her armor cracked enough to show the frightened young woman beneath, alone, responsible for a brother barely into his teens, facing threats that would have overwhelmed someone twice her age. Thank you, she said softly. I know it is not much of a prospect, but… We will get those cattle to Miles City, Zachary interrupted, and we will get a fair price for them. That is all we can do. Willa nodded and turned to go, but paused in the doorway. Zachary, why did you stay, that first day, I mean? You could have ridden on to any of a dozen ranches that would pay real wages. Why here? It was a fair question, and Zachary did not have a good answer. Or rather, he had an answer he was not ready to examine too closely. Seemed like you needed the help, he said finally. Something shifted in Willa's expression, something warm and wondering that made Zachary's chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the hard day's work. Good night, Zachary Tucker, she said quietly, and was gone into the gathering dusk. Zachary stood alone in the barn, listening to her footsteps fade across the yard, and admitted to himself that he was in serious trouble. The kind of trouble that had nothing to do with failing ranches or threatening loans, and everything to do with the way his heart had started beating faster whenever Willa Anderson walked into a room. He was halfway to breaking his own cardinal rule about not letting anyone close enough to hurt him, and the worst part was that he could not bring himself to care. The next morning brought trouble of a different sort. Zachary was checking the herd's salt lick when he spotted a line of riders approaching from the east, 5 men on good horses, led by someone who sat his saddle with the easy confidence of money and power. Raymond Sutherland had come calling. Zachary rode back to the ranch house at a gallop, arriving just as the riders entered the yard. Willa emerged from the house, Nathaniel at her shoulder, a gangly 13-year-old with his sister's dark hair and a protective scowl that would have been amusing on someone less young. Sutherland swung down from his blood bay gelding with practiced ease. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of face that women probably found handsome if they did not know about dead wives and calculated cruelty. His clothes were expensive, tailored trousers, a silk vest, a coat that had never seen a day's hard work. Miss Anderson, he said, removing his hat in a show of respect that fooled exactly no one. I was passing by and thought I would check on how you are managing. These spring months can be so challenging for a young woman running a ranch alone. I am not alone, Willa said flatly. I have hired help, as you can see. Sutherland's gaze slid to Zachary with dismissive indifference, one drifting cowboy. My dear, that is hardly sufficient for a property of this size. I have 40 men working my land, experienced men who know cattle and horses and how to protect what is valuable. The emphasis on the last word was deliberate, and Zachary felt his jaw tighten. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Sutherland, Willa said with exaggerated politeness, but as I told you before, I have the situation well in hand. Now if you will excuse me, I have work to do. Actually, I came to make you another offer. Sutherland settled his hat back on his head and smiled, a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. I have been thinking about your situation. That debt your father owed me, it weighs on my conscience, leaving you burdened with it, so I am prepared to extend the terms, give you another full year to pay it off. It sounded generous. It was anything but, and Zachary could see Willa knew it. Another year of struggle, of barely surviving, of Sutherland riding by to remind her that he held all the cards. In exchange for what? Willa asked coldly. Nothing permanent. Just companionship, supper once a week. Let me court you properly, the way a lady deserves. If at the end of that year you still wish to refuse my hand in marriage, well, then I will consider other arrangements. And if I refuse this generous offer? Sutherland's smile never wavered. Then the original terms stand, $600 by October 15th, or the property transfers to me. I am sure you will make the wise choice, Miss Anderson. You have 48 hours to think it over. He mounted his gelding with the same easy grace, tipped his hat mockingly to Zachary, and led his men back the way they had come. The moment they were out of sight, Nathaniel exploded. That filthy snake, Willa, you cannot. I am not considering it, Willa said sharply. Not for a moment, I would rather. She cut herself off, but Zachary could fill in the rest. She would rather lose everything than put herself in Sutherland's power. He will not wait until October, Zachary said quietly. Man like that, when he does not get what he wants, he gets creative. Willa turned to him, and he could see the fear she was working so hard to hide. What do you mean? I mean you need to be careful, keep Nathaniel close, do not ride out alone, and if Sutherland or any of his men show up when I am not here, you bar the door and you shoot through the window if they try to come inside. You think he would? I think a man who has already run off one wife and maybe killed another is capable of anything. Zachary met her eyes steadily. I am going into town this afternoon, going to have a talk with the marshal, let him know what is happening out here. Marshal Crowley is in Sutherland's pocket, Nathaniel said bitterly. Everyone knows it. Sutherland owns half the businesses in Copper Creek. Then I will talk to people who are not in his pocket. A man like that makes enemies. Time to find them and make some alliances of our own. Willa looked at him for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her eyes. This is not your fight, Zachary. You do not have to. Yes, I do, Zachary interrupted and realized as he said it that it was true. Somewhere in the past few weeks, Willa's fight had become his fight. Her ranch had become something worth defending, and the thought of Raymond Sutherland laying hands on her made Zachary want to commit violence, which was foolish, which was dangerous. Which was the exact kind of emotional entanglement he had sworn to avoid. But looking at Willa standing there in the morning sun with her chin lifted, and her eyes bright with unshed tears she would never allow to fall, Zachary discovered he did not care about his own rules anymore. I will ride into town with you, Willa said firmly. If you are going to fight my battles, the least I can do is stand beside you while you do it. They left Nathaniel with strict instructions to keep the rifle loaded and not open the door to anyone, then rode the 10 miles to Copper Creek in a silence that was surprisingly comfortable. Zachary found himself acutely aware of Willa beside him, the straight line of her back, the competent way she handled her horse, the little furrow that appeared between her eyebrows when she was thinking hard about something. Can I ask you something? Willa said as they approached the outskirts of town. Sure. Why are you really here? And do not tell me it is just about work. You could make 3 times what I am paying or not paying at any ranch in Montana territory. So why stay? It was the second time she had asked, and Zachary knew he owed her an honest answer. The trouble was finding words for something he barely understood himself. I have spent the last 10 years avoiding exactly this, he said finally, getting tied to a place, getting invested in people. The frontier takes everything you love eventually, so I figured the smart move was not to love anything. That sounds like a lonely way to live. It is. But it is also safe. Zachary glanced at her, then back at the trail. When I saw you in that yard fighting with that horse, looking like you were holding the whole world together through sheer stubbornness, I told myself I was just helping someone in need. That I would work a few weeks, earn some traveling money, then move on like always. But somewhere along the way I stopped wanting to move on. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but Zachary kept going. You do not quit, Willa, not when things get hard, not when any sane person would walk away. You just keep fighting, and I guess I wanted to see what happens when someone actually fights for something instead of running from it. Willa was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I am fighting because I have no choice. If I had somewhere to run to, I probably would have by now. You are giving me too much credit. I do not think I am giving you enough. They reached Copper Creek and hitched their horses outside the general store. The town was small, one main street with a handful of businesses, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses. As they walked down the wooden sidewalk, Zachary noticed the way people's gazes slid away from Willa, the way conversations died as they passed. Small-town sympathy had apparently run its course, replaced by the cautious distance people maintained around impending failure. all except one person. A woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and a dress that marked her as respectable but not wealthy called out from the doorway of the general store. "Willa Anderson, you stop right there." Willa turned and a genuine smile crossed her face. "Mrs. Hawthorne." "I heard about Thomas. I am so sorry, dear. He was a good man." Martha Hawthorne bustled over and enveloped Willa in a hug that was probably more comfort than she had received in weeks. "And I heard about Sutherland, too. That man is a plague on this valley. You know about his offer." "Honey, everyone knows. That snake made sure of it. Figures public pressure will push you into accepting." Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes flashed with anger. "But I want you to know that some of us have not forgotten how Thomas helped us when our store nearly failed 3 years ago. You need supplies, you come to us. We will extend you credit until you can pay." "I cannot ask you to." "You are not asking. I am offering." Mrs. Hawthorne glanced at Zachary. "And who is this young man?" "Zachary Tucker, ma'am. I am working for Miss Anderson." Mrs. Hawthorne's sharp eyes assessed him thoroughly. Good, she needs someone watching her back. "Sutherland's men have been causing trouble all over the valley, fences cut, cattle spooked, wells fouled with dead animals. Nothing anyone can prove, of course, but we all know who is behind it." This was news, and troubling news at that. "How many other small ranchers are there?" Zachary asked. 5 families within 20 miles. "All of them struggling, all of them in debt to Sutherland in one way or another. If Willa loses her ranch, the rest will fall like dominoes." Mrs. Hawthorne shook her head grimly. "That man will not be satisfied until he owns every acre from here to the Yellowstone River." "Then maybe it is time the small ranchers stopped fighting separate battles and started working together," Zachary said slowly as an idea took shape. "If Sutherland is playing this game, he is doing it because he figures everyone is too scared or too proud to band together. Prove him wrong, and his whole strategy falls apart." Willa was staring at him with something like hope dawning in her eyes. "You mean form an association, pool resources?" "More than that, I mean coordinate drives to market, share the cost of hired hands, watch each other's backs. There is strength in numbers even out here." Zachary looked at Mrs. Hawthorne. "You know these families, think they would be willing to meet?" "I think they are desperate enough to try anything. Give me 3 days, I will get word out." They spent the next hour at the general store, stocking up on supplies, flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition, all carefully noted in the ledger Mrs. Hawthorne kept. Then they stopped by the land office where a sympathetic clerk named Douglas let them review the water rights documents, confirming what Willa had said about the spring being the key to the whole valley. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the sun was dipping toward the western peaks and a plan was starting to take shape. It was audacious, probably foolish, and depended on convincing people who barely knew each other to trust their futures to collective action. But it was better than waiting for Sutherland to pick them off one by one. "Do you really think this could work?" Willa asked as the ranch came into view. "Honestly, I do not know." Zachary glanced at her. "But I know doing nothing guarantees failure. At least this way, we go down fighting." "We," Willa repeated softly. "You keep saying we, like this is your fight too." "It is." Zachary pulled his horse to a stop, and Willa did the same. They sat there in the fading light, the mountains purple against the darkening sky, and Zachary made himself say the truth that had been building for weeks. Somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a job. "I care what happens to you, Willa. I care about Nathaniel, I care about this ranch, and I am done pretending otherwise." Willa's eyes went wide, and for a moment she looked younger than her 22 years, vulnerable and uncertain in a way she never allowed herself to be. "Zachary, you do not have to say anything, I just needed you to know. Whatever happens with Sutherland, with the ranch, I am not walking away, not unless you tell me to." "I will not tell you to." Willa's voice was barely above a whisper. "I cannot offer you anything, you understand. No money, no security, just you," Zachary finished. "That is enough." He did not know who moved first, maybe it did not matter. But suddenly they were closer, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek, her eyes fluttering closed, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and fierce and full of all the things neither of them knew how to say. When they finally broke apart, Willa was crying, silent tears that tracked down her cheeks in the twilight. "I am so scared," she whispered. I am terrified of losing everything, of failing my father, of not being strong enough. You are the strongest person I have ever met. Zachary brushed the tears away with his thumb. And you do not have to be strong alone anymore. I am here, for as long as you will have me. Willa leaned into him, and Zachary wrapped his arms around her, holding her as the stars began to emerge overhead. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the future did not look like just an endless string of lonely roads. It looked like this woman, this place, this chance to build something that mattered. 3 days later, the promised meeting took place in the Andersons' barn. 6 families showed up, weather-beaten ranchers with their wives, faces lined by hard living but eyes still sharp with determination. There was Carl Morrison and his wife Helen, whose spread bordered the Andersons to the south. The Chen family, whose father had come from China to work the railroad and stayed to raise cattle. Young Jacob Reeves, barely 25, trying to make a go of his late uncle's claim. The 3 Walsh brothers, Irish and stubborn, who ran cattle on the eastern sections. And the Johnsons, an older couple whose sons had died in the war, leaving them to work their land alone. Zachary let Willa do most of the talking. This was her community, her fight, and they needed to see her as a leader worth following. She laid out the situation clearly: Sutherland's pattern of predatory lending, the strategic importance of controlling water rights, the way he was systematically acquiring small ranches to build his empire. He is counting on us being too proud or too scared to work together, Willa said, standing in the lamplight with her shoulders squared. He is counting on each of us failing individually so he can pick up the pieces. I say we prove him wrong. How? Carl Morrison asked bluntly. Man owns the bank, owns the marshal, owns half the businesses in town. What can a bunch of struggling ranchers do against that? We can survive, Zachary spoke up from where he leaned against the barn wall. Sutherland's power comes from controlling resources, land, water, money, but he cannot control everything. He cannot control your willingness to help each other. Cannot control information or coordination or collective bargaining. Speak plain, son, one of the Walsh brothers said. What are you proposing? Over the next hour, they hammered out the basics. They would form a Valley Ranchers Association with shared responsibilities. During the cattle drive to Miles City, they would combine their herds. Bigger numbers meant better prices and fewer losses to rustlers or accidents. They would contribute to a common fund for emergencies, even if it was just a few dollars each. Most importantly, they would watch each other's property, spreading out the labor and making it harder for Sutherland's men to cause mischief without witnesses. This only works if we trust each other, Helen Morrison said quietly. And trust has been in short supply around here lately. My father trusted you, Willa said, meeting Helen's eyes. When your barn burned 4 years ago, he sent Nathaniel and me over with food and lumber, did not ask for anything in return. That is the kind of community he believed in. That is what I am asking us to rebuild. Silence stretched through the barn, then slowly Carl Morrison stood and extended his hand to Willa. Thomas was a good man. I reckon his daughter is made of the same stuff. The Morrisons are in. One by one, the others stood and shook hands, a circle of agreement sealed not with legal documents but with the kind of frontier trust that ran deeper than any contract. By the time the meeting broke up near midnight, they had the framework of something that might actually work. As the last wagon rattled out of the yard, Willa turned to Zachary with exhaustion and exhilaration mixed on her face. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, Zachary corrected. I just helped. No, we did it together. Willa stepped closer, and even in the darkness he could see the warmth in her eyes. I never believed I could have this help partnership. Someone who... She trailed off, but the unspoken word hung in the air between them. Someone who loves you. Zachary pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, soap and wood smoke, and something uniquely Willa. Get some sleep, he murmured against her temple. Tomorrow the real work starts. But tomorrow brought disaster instead. Zachary woke before dawn to the smell of smoke. He bolted from the bunkhouse to find the barn engulfed in flames, hungry orange tongues licking at the night sky, sparks rising like malevolent stars. Willa was already there in her nightdress and coat, bucket in hand, screaming for Nathaniel to get more water. The next 2 hours were a hell of heat and desperation. They managed to get the horses out, but the barn was a total loss. By the time the sun rose over the mountains, nothing remained but smoking timbers and the acrid stench of destruction. Willa stood in the ruins with soot streaking her face and her hands blistered from the buckets, staring at the devastation with eyes that had gone flat and empty. All the fire equipment, all the leather tack, all the feed stored for summer gone. Tens of dollars of loss they could not afford. This was not an accident, Nathaniel said, his voice shaking with fury. He held up a glass bottle partially melted. I found 3 of these, kerosene bottles. Arson. Deliberate, calculated destruction, and everyone knew who was behind it, even if proving it was impossible. He is sending a message, Willa said dully. Comply, or this is just the beginning. Zachary's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at him to ride to the Double S Ranch and put a bullet in Raymond Sutherland. But that was exactly what the man wanted, an excuse to have Zachary arrested or killed, leaving Willa vulnerable. We rebuild, Zachary said through gritted teeth, and we make sure everyone in the valley knows what happened here. By noon, word had spread. The ranching families they had met with 3 days before began arriving, not with sympathy but with lumber, tools, and willing hands. Carl Morrison brought his sons. The Walsh brothers showed up with a wagon full of milled timber. The Chens contributed nails and hardware. Even townspeople who had kept their distance showed up to help. Mrs. Hawthorne brought food. The blacksmith brought metalwork. For 3 days they worked from sunup to sundown, and a new barn rose from the ashes of the old. It was not as large, not as sturdy, but it stood, a testament to what people could accomplish when they refused to be broken. On the evening of the 3rd day, as the last beam was nailed into place, Raymond Sutherland rode into the yard with 6 armed men at his back. Impressive, he called out, surveying the new barn with a thin smile. Though I have to wonder about the return on investment, all this work for a ranch that will be mine in 4 months anyway. Get off my property, Willa said coldly, standing in the center of the yard with a hammer still in her hand. Such hostility, and here I came to offer you one more chance. Sutherland dismounted leisurely, his men spreading out in a loose semicircle. That fire was a tragedy, could have been much worse, could have spread to the house. With a woman and boy sleeping inside, who knows what might have happened. The threat was not even subtle. Zachary moved to Willa's side, one hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. Around the yard, other men, Carl Morrison, the Walsh brothers, Jacob Reeves, had stopped working and were drifting closer, forming a silent wall of bodies between Sutherland and Willa. You are not welcome here, Carl Morrison said flatly. Best you and your men ride on before there is trouble. Sutherland's smile widened. Are you threatening me, Carl? That would be unwise. I hold the note on your property too, remember. Would be a shame if your next loan payment got misplaced. Document everything, Mrs. Hawthorne's voice rang out from where she stood near the house. She held up a small leather journal. Every threat, every insinuation, every piece of vandalism, I am keeping records, and I am not the only one. You might own the marshal, Sutherland, but you do not own the territorial governor. Keep pushing, and we will see what happens when your methods get exposed to the light. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Sutherland's face. He was used to intimidating isolated families, not organized resistance. You are making a mistake, he said, his voice going hard. All of you, I was offering a civilized solution. Now nothing, Willa interrupted. You are going to get on your horse and leave, and if you or any of your men set foot on my property again without invitation, I will shoot first and ask questions later. Montana territory law is very clear about a person's right to defend their home. Sutherland's face went mottled with rage. For a moment, Zachary thought the man might actually order his men to attack. But the odds were too even, the witnesses too many. Instead, Sutherland mounted his horse with jerky movements and pointed a finger at Willa. October 15th, he snarled. $600 or this land is mine. And then we will see how brave you are, Miss Anderson. We will see how long all these good neighbors stand by you when I own the bank, the water rights, and every scrap of land from here to Miles City. You are just delaying the inevitable. He wheeled his horse and spurred it viciously, his men following. They thundered out of the yard, leaving a wake of dust and unspoken violence. The moment they were out of sight, Willa's knees buckled. Zachary caught her, holding her upright as the fear and adrenaline she had been suppressing came flooding out. She was shaking hard, her breath coming in gasps. "I have you," Zachary murmured. "I have you. You are safe." "He is going to kill us," Willa whispered, "or burn us out, or—" "No, he is not." Zachary tilted her face up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Because we are not alone anymore. You saw that, everyone standing together. That is what he fears, not you, not me, but all of us refusing to back down. But what if it is not enough? What if we cannot get enough money for the cattle? What if—" "Then we fight anyway. We fight because that is what you do. That is what your father taught you." Zachary brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And no matter what happens, I am right here beside you. Do you understand? I am not leaving. Not now, not ever." Willa stared at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, the fear transmuting into something fiercer, something like determination forged in fire. "I love you," she said suddenly, fiercely. "I did not want to, I tried not to, but I do. I love you, Zachary Tucker, and I am terrified of what that means when everything could fall apart." "I love you too," Zachary said, and felt the words settle in his chest like a truth he had been avoiding for too long. "And yes, everything could fall apart. The frontier does not promise happy endings, but I would rather have whatever time we get together than a lifetime of safety alone. You taught me that." He kissed her then in front of God and half the valley, and did not care who saw. When they finally broke apart, Willa was crying again, but this time the tears looked like relief. The next months passed in a blur of hard work and mounting tension. They moved the cattle to better pasture, branded the spring calves, repaired every fence and building until the ranch was in the best shape it had been in years. The Ranchers Association met weekly, coordinating efforts and sharing information. Twice more, Sutherland's men were spotted skulking around Anderson property, but the presence of watchful neighbors sent them scurrying. Through it all, Zachary and Willa grew closer, their relationship deepening from attraction to partnership to something that felt as solid and enduring as the mountains themselves. They worked side by side during the day, and in the evenings, Zachary would sit on the porch with Willa and Nathaniel, talking about everything and nothing while the stars wheeled overhead. Nathaniel, to his credit, adapted quickly to having Zachary around. The boy was clearly hungry for male guidance after losing his father, and Zachary found himself enjoying the role of mentor, teaching Nathaniel to handle a rope properly, to read the sky for weather, to shoot straight. "You are good with him," Willa said one evening as they watched Nathaniel practice his roping on fence posts. "He admires you. He is a good kid, smart. He's going to do well no matter what happens with the ranch." "What do you think will happen?" "Honestly—" Zachary considered the question carefully. They had 63 head ready for market, and prices at the railhead were holding steady. If they got lucky, avoided stampedes and rustlers and all the other calamities that could befall a cattle drive, they might clear enough to pay off Sutherland with a little left over. "If they got lucky, I think we have a fighting chance," Zachary said finally. "Better than most people get out here." Willa nodded slowly, her hand finding his and squeezing tight. "If we lose the ranch, what will you do?" "Where will you go?" "Wherever you go," Zachary said simply. "Willa, I need to ask you something, and I am going to do it wrong because I have never done it before." He pulled her to her feet and, before his courage could fail, dropped to one knee. Willa's eyes went wide. "I do not have a ring," Zachary said, his heart hammering. "I do not have money or land or anything to offer you except my word and my work, but I love you, Willa Anderson. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you never give up even when you should. I love that you taught me it is okay to care about something more than survival. And if you will have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice. Will you marry me?" Willa was crying again, always crying lately, she would joke, but her smile was radiant. "Yes, yes, you foolish, wonderful man, yes." Zachary stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while Nathaniel whooped from across the yard. They would marry in the fall, after the drive, after they knew what the future held, but the promise was made, and it felt more binding than any legal document. Late August arrived with scorching heat and the knowledge that time was running out. The drive to Miles City needed to happen soon. Waiting too long meant risking early snow in the mountain passes. The Valley Association gathered one last time to coordinate the drive. Combining their herds, they had nearly 300 head of cattle, enough to make the journey worthwhile, but also enough to attract unwanted attention. "Sutherland will try something," Carl Morrison said grimly. "Man has too much invested in seeing us fail." "Then we will be ready," Zachary replied. He had been thinking about this problem for weeks and had a plan that was risky but might work. "We split the herd. Send 100 head north through the easy passes with most of the drovers. Anyone watching will follow them. Meanwhile, we take the Anderson and Morrison cattle, about 160 head, south through Crow territory. Longer route, more dangerous, but Sutherland will not expect it." "Crow territory?" Helen Morrison's face went pale. "Zachary, there has been tension since that surveyor got killed last spring. If they think we are encroaching. I know the risks, but I also know that the Crow chief, White Bear, has been trading with Thomas Anderson for years. There is history there, respect. If we approach them properly, ask permission to cross their land in exchange for cattle as payment, they might allow it." It was a gamble built on maybes and hopes, but it was also creative enough that Sutherland would never see it coming. After heated debate, they agreed to try it. The northern group would leave first, making a show of their departure. 3 days later, Zachary and Willa would lead the southern group toward Crow territory. The morning of the departure, Willa stood in the yard with Nathaniel, giving her younger brother last-minute instructions. He would stay with the Morrisons during the 3 weeks they expected to be gone. "Keep the rifle loaded," Willa said for the 10th time, "if anyone from the Double S comes around." "I know, Willa, I am not a child." Nathaniel's voice cracked on the last word, betraying his youth despite his attempt at bravery. Willa hugged him tight. "I know you are not, I am scared, Nathaniel, of so many things." "You will be fine, you have Zachary." Nathaniel pulled back and looked at her seriously. "He will keep you safe, and you will keep him safe. That is what people who love each other do." Wisdom from a 13-year-old, but it was not wrong. Willa squeezed his shoulder once more, then mounted her horse. Zachary was already mounted, along with Carl Morrison and 2 of his sons. 5 drovers for 160 head of cattle was lean, but they could not spare more without raising suspicion. They moved the cattle out slowly, heading southwest away from the main trail. For 2 days they saw no signs of pursuit. On the 3rd day they reached the edge of Crow territory, marked by an ancient line of stone cairns that predated white settlement. "This is the point of no return," Carl said quietly. "Cross here without permission and we are invaders. They have every right to take the cattle and our scalps." "Then we ask permission." Zachary dismounted and pulled a white cloth from his saddlebag, tying it to a long stick, the universal sign of parley. "Willa, stay with the herd if this goes wrong." "If this goes wrong, I am coming after you," Willa said flatly. "Do not ask me to abandon you." Zachary wanted to argue, but the expression on her face told him it would be pointless. "Fine, but stay mounted and ready to run." He rode forward alone, holding the white flag high. Within minutes, 3 Crow warriors appeared as if conjured from the landscape itself, young men on painted ponies, armed with rifles and bows, faces painted for war. The leader raised his hand in the sign for stop, and Zachary complied. In halting words English mixed with the limited Crow he had picked up from traders, Zachary explained their purpose. They sought only to cross Crow land to reach the railroad. They offered 10 head of cattle as payment for safe passage. They came in peace and asked permission from White Bear, who had known Thomas Anderson. The warriors conferred in rapid Crow that Zachary could not follow. Then the leader gestured for him to follow, and they rode deeper into Crow territory. An hour later, they reached a summer camp nestled in a valley where a creek ran clear and cold. White Bear was older than Zachary expected, maybe 60, with gray braids and a face carved by wind and time into something resembling ancient stone. But his eyes were sharp as he listened to Zachary's halting explanation, translated more fluently by one of the warriors who spoke better English. "You are the man who works for Anderson's daughter," White Bear said. It was not a question. "She sent you to beg permission." "She sent me to ask for trade, passage across your land in exchange for cattle." Zachary met the chief's eyes steadily. "Thomas Anderson traded fairly with your people. We ask to honor that tradition." White Bear was silent for a long moment, then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Thomas Anderson was a man of honor." He did not cheat, did not lie, did not promise what he could not deliver. His daughter, she has his strength. More than he ever had, Zachary said honestly. She is fighting to keep her land against a man who would take everything from her through debt and threats. These cattle represent her hope of survival. And you, what are you to her? I am her future if we can build one together. I love her. White Bear nodded slowly as if this answer satisfied something. Love is worth fighting for. The Crow understand this. You may cross our lands, 10 cattle for passage as you offered, and a warning, the man you spoke of, the one who would take her land. His riders were seen on the northern trail 3 days ago. Many men following the larger herd. Which meant Sutherland had taken the bait. The northern group would be dealing with harassment, maybe worse, but the southern route was clear. Thank you, Zachary said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. One more thing. White Bear stood and approached Zachary, placing a hand on his shoulder. Tell Anderson's daughter that her father saved my grandson's life 7 winters ago when sickness came. I could not repay that debt while he lived. I repay it now. You will have safe passage, and my warriors will escort you to our southern boundary. Any who trouble you will answer to the Crow Nation. Zachary felt his throat tighten with emotion. That is, thank you, she will be honored. When he rode back to where Willa and the others waited with the news, Willa actually laughed, a sound of pure relief and disbelief. My father never told me he saved White Bear's grandson. He never told me any of it. He was a humble man, Carl Morrison said, grinning, and we just got the luckiest break imaginable. Let us move these cattle while our luck holds. For the next 10 days, they pushed hard across Crow territory with an escort of 6 warriors who kept other tribes at bay and led them around the most difficult terrain. They lost only 3 head, 1 to a broken leg, 2 to a mountain lion, which was almost miraculous for a drive this size. When they finally crossed into the lands beyond Crow territory and the warriors turned back, Willa rode to their leader and handed over not 10 cattle, but 15. For the debt my father owed and the debt I owe now, she said. The warrior accepted with a nod of respect, and then they were gone, melting back into the landscape as silently as they had appeared. The final leg of the journey to Miles City was almost anticlimactic. They arrived dusty, exhausted, and triumphant to find the railhead bustling with activity. Prices were good, better than they had dared hope. After the rail fees and paying the drovers, Willa walked away with $732, more than enough to pay off Sutherland, enough to start rebuilding, enough to hope. That night in a modest hotel in Miles City, Willa and Zachary sat at a tiny table with the money counted out between them, and Willa started crying again, this time with sheer overwhelming relief. We did it, she whispered. Zachary, we actually did it. You did it, Zachary corrected gently. I just helped. No, we did it together. Willa reached across the table and took his hands. I could not have survived this without you. I would have given up or given in to Sutherland or lost everything. You saved me. You saved yourself, Zachary said. You saved all of us, the whole valley. You showed everyone what was possible when people refused to be broken. They married the next morning in a small church, with Carl Morrison and his wife as witnesses. It was not the wedding Willa probably deserved. No fancy dress, no big celebration, just a simple exchange of vows before a tired preacher who had seen 1,000 frontier marriages and would see 1,000 more. But when Zachary slipped the plain gold band he had bought at the general store onto Willa's finger, and when she said, I do, with tears streaming down her face, it felt like the most important moment of his entire life. They consummated their marriage that night in the hotel room, and Zachary discovered that making love to Willa was like everything else about her, fierce and tender, and more real than anything he had ever known. Afterward, lying in the narrow bed with her head on his chest and her hair spilling across his skin, Zachary felt something he had not felt in more than a decade. Peace, contentment, home. What are you thinking? Willa murmured sleepily. That I spent 10 years believing love was a weakness, that caring about anything made you vulnerable. Zachary stroked her hair gently. You proved me wrong. Love is not weakness. It is the only thing strong enough to survive out here. We survived, Willa agreed, against odds that should have buried us, and now we get to live. Now we get to live, Zachary echoed and pulled her closer. They returned to the ranch 2 weeks later to find Nathaniel bursting with news. The northern herd had made it to Miles City safely despite harassment from Sutherland's men. Apparently, the presence of so many witnesses had kept things from escalating into violence. The other families had all sold their cattle for good prices, and most satisfying, Raymond Sutherland had been arrested. Arrested? Willa stared at Nathaniel in disbelief. For what? For arson, intimidation, fraud, and about 6 other charges, Nathaniel said gleefully. Turns out Mrs. Hawthorne's records were not the only ones being kept. Half the valley had been documenting Sutherland's methods for years, just waiting for someone brave enough to bring charges. When they heard you had successfully made the drive and paid off your debt, everyone came forward at once. The territorial marshal came down from Helena himself to arrest Sutherland. It seemed too good to be true, but over the following days the details emerged. Sutherland had overreached himself, and when the valley finally united against him, his house of cards collapsed. His bank was audited and found to have numerous irregularities. His ranch foreman turned witness, testifying to years of illegal intimidation and violence. Even the local marshal who had been in Sutherland's pocket suddenly developed a convenient memory of suspicious activities. Raymond Sutherland was going to prison for a long time. On October 15th, exactly 1 day before the debt would have come due, Willa walked into the land office in Copper Creek and paid off her father's loan in full. Douglas the clerk recorded the transaction with a smile and handed her the deed to the Anderson ranch free and clear of all encumbrances. Your father would be proud, Douglas said quietly. You did the impossible, Miss Anderson. Or should I say Mrs. Tucker? Mrs. Tucker, Willa agreed, and the name felt right in a way she had never expected. She walked out of the land office to find Zachary waiting with the wagon, and he helped her up to the seat beside him. As they rode home through the autumn afternoon with the mountains painted gold and crimson, Willa leaned against her husband's shoulder and felt something she had not felt since her father died. Safe, hopeful. Like the future was something to anticipate rather than fear. What are you thinking? Zachary asked, echoing her question from that night in Miles City. I am thinking about next spring, about the calves that will be born, about expanding the herd. About maybe adding a room onto the house. She glanced at him with a small smile. We will need more space eventually, for children. Zachary's hand tightened on the reins and she saw his throat work with emotion. Children, he repeated. You want? I want everything, Willa said simply. A life, a family, a future with you, all the things I thought I could not have while I was just fighting to survive. I want to live, Zachary, really live. With you. He pulled the wagon to a stop right there on the trail and kissed her like they had all the time in the world. And maybe they did. Maybe that was the gift they had given each other, not just survival, but the promise of years stretching ahead, full of ordinary miracles and hard-won joy. When they finally made it back to the ranch, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple. Nathaniel came running out to meet them, and together the 3 of them walked into the house, a family, imperfect and resilient, built from loss and determination and love that refused to quit. That winter was the coldest in 20 years, but the Anderson Ranch, now the Tucker Ranch, though everyone still called it the Anderson place out of respect, weathered it beautifully. Zachary had prepared well, stockpiling hay and reinforcing buildings. The cattle survived with minimal losses. In the spring, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The baby, a girl they named Grace after Zachary's mother, was born in December during a blizzard with Mrs. Hawthorne serving as midwife and Zachary pacing the floor like a caged wolf. When Mrs. Hawthorne finally let him into the bedroom and he saw Willa holding their daughter, something broke open in Zachary's chest. All the walls he had built, all the defenses he had maintained for so long, crumbled completely. He sat on the edge of the bed and cried, great shuddering sobs of relief and gratitude and overwhelming love. She is perfect, Willa whispered, exhausted but radiant. Zachary, look what we made. I see her, Zachary managed, touching one tiny perfect hand with his finger. I see both of you, my whole world right here. Over the next years, their family grew. 2 more children, a boy they named Thomas after Willa's father, and another girl named Clara. Nathaniel grew into a fine young man who eventually decided ranching was not for him and left to attend college in the East, though he returned every summer to help with the drives. The Valley Ranchers Association continued to thrive, growing to include more than 20 families. They built a small school, established a real bank not controlled by any single interest, and created a community that proved the frontier did not have to be a place of isolation and ruthless competition. Raymond Sutherland died in prison 6 years after his arrest. Willa attended the funeral out of some sense of obligation, but felt nothing but relief that his shadow had been permanently lifted from the valley. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary and Willa stood on the porch of their expanded home, now a proper 2-story structure with real glass windows and a parlor, watching their children play in the yard. Grace was 9, precocious and fearless. Thomas was 7, thoughtful and gentle. Clara was 5, already showing signs of inheriting her mother's stubborn determination. "Do you ever regret it?" Willa asked, slipping her hand into Zachary's. "Giving up the wandering life for this?" Zachary looked at her, his wife, his partner, the woman who had taught him that love was not weakness but the greatest strength a person could possess. She was 32 now, lines beginning to form at the corners of her eyes, her hands were cruffined despite her prosperity. She had never looked more beautiful. "Regret," Zachary shook his head. "Willa, you and these children are the best thing that ever happened to me, the only thing that matters. I spent so many years afraid to want anything because the frontier takes everything. But it gave me you, it gave me this. How could I ever regret that?" Willa smiled and leaned into him, and they stood together watching the sun set over their land they had fought for, suffered for, and finally claimed not through violence but through sheer determination to build something better. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving, but it was also a place where new beginnings were possible, where two people who had every reason to stay isolated and protected could instead choose to risk everything for love. Where struggle could forge bonds stronger than steel, and hope could survive even the darkest winters. Zachary Tucker had come to Montana Territory believing he wanted nothing but solitude and survival. Willa Anderson had been fighting alone, convinced she could not afford to trust anyone with her burdens. Together they had discovered a truth more powerful than either belief, that love, real love, was worth every risk. That family was not a weakness but a fortress. That home was not a place but the people you chose to stand beside through every trial and triumph. As the stars began to emerge in the deepening twilight and their children's laughter rang across the yard, Zachary pulled Willa closer and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For this woman, for these children, for this life they had built from nothing but determination and hope and love that refused to die. The frontier had tried to teach them that survival meant staying alone. Instead, they had proved that the only way to truly survive was together, and in doing so they had built something that would last for generations, a legacy not of land or cattle, but of courage, partnership, and the unshakable belief that love could bloom even in the harshest soil, and once rooted, could weather any storm. Their journey had changed everything, just as they had changed each other. And as they stood on their porch under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by the life they had built together, both of them knew with absolute certainty that they had found what truly mattered. They had found home. They had found family. They had found forever, and that was worth more than all the gold in California, all the cattle in Montana, all the dreams a person could dream, because they had each other and they always would until their last breath and beyond. The end of their struggle was the beginning of their story, and it was a story that would be told around valley fires for years to come. The tale of a struggling rancher's daughter and the cowboy who loved her, and how together they proved that even on the wild frontier, love could conquer all.